Thank you, Bob. And thanks everybody for joining us today for our third installment of the Repel and the Invaders webinar. So we are talking about trees and shrubs today, and you can see that we will be wrapping up our series next time with vines. So any of the questions that you have today about trees and shrubs, we'll try and answer those at the end of the presentation, and then bring those vine questions to the next one. Of course, want to always thank Purdue Extension for hosting this webinar series for us. Okay, so let's talk about trees and shrubs. But first, I want to show you the map of where all of these regional specialists are placed across the state. So you can see I'm in the West Central region, based in Vigo County, but all across the state, there's talent just waiting to help you out. So reach out to your closest regional specialists and or our project coordinator. We're there to help you with any of the questions that you have as far as identifying those invasive species and then properly managing them. So what is an invasive species? We'll cover this every time. When I talk about an invasive, I'm referring specifically to an organism that is non-native to Indiana. And not only are they non-native, but they are also causing harm or likely to cause harm. So there are species that we are watching that are showing some invasive tendencies, and we want to make sure that they don't cause any harm to our state. So they're causing harm to our economy, our environment, and also to our health, to human health, animal, and also plant health. And animal includes your pets and also livestock. And then of course our wildlife. You can see 3 species are pictured there. One is the berry plant. It is an Asian bittersweet, which is a vine that I'll cover next time. And you can see the wild feral pig, and then emerald ash borer that many of you know about because of the infestation that they caused and devastation on our ash trees. So that's what we're talking about today, invasive species that are harmful. We're going to cover how to control these invasive shrubs and trees, and this document will be in a box folder for everybody that participates. So you don't have to memorize this today. But this is our calendar of control. It is a general calendar for you to kind of give you a stepping stone to get started on managing these invasives. And you can see at the top of the document is shrubs. So we're going to cover every single one of those shrubs today. And this is sort of my niche. And in the invasive species management, these are the plants that I've had the most hands-on experience with. So I can tell you from firsthand experience how to manage these. With this document, what you can do is you can look at what month you're currently in, and you can start to identify what you should be prioritizing. So everything is color-coded, and the corresponding color matches the herbicide recommendation at the bottom of the document. So we will cover every single one of those in more detail. This is a 2-sided document. We did cover herbaceous, the first series. We covered those herbaceous plants. And then last Wednesday, we covered grasses. And we're going to cover trees that you see there at the bottom of the document. Again, color-coded for you. So you can just follow your month down to the color and determine what best suits your needs for that time of the year and for your property. At the very bottom, you'll see what we are talking about when we say glyphosate or triclopyr or imazapyr. Those are giving you some ideas of the brand names. Certainly not all of the brand names, but just a few that you might get started using. Of course, if you're in an aquatic area, you want to use an aquatic labeled herbicide. And always follow the label. No matter what herbicide you pick up, you want to make sure you read that label front to back. Okay, so this document will be available to you. We're going to talk about shrubs first and then trees. First up, I wanted to cover one of the most common invasive shrubs that we are dealing with across the state, Eurasian bush honeysuckles. So this shrub was introduced from Asia in the 1700s and 1800s as an ornamental and also for wildlife plant. It is an upright shrub. Oftentimes we hear questions of whether or not this shrub can resemble a tree. And yes, it can, because they get quite tall, upwards of 15 feet tall even. So it is a shrub. There are several species that you want to be on the watch for. And luckily, all of those species are now banned for sale in our state because of the terrestrial plant rule. So you shouldn't be seeing them for sale any longer, which is great. But all of those species are invasive. They have simple oval leaves, oppositely arranged, which is directly across from one another that you can see in the photo. They have sort of a tubular flower, but the flower can be different colors. Even on that image, you can see that on one plant, there are white and also yellow flowers, but that is the same shrub. You can also find pink to crimson colored flowers on some of the varieties. They will have very abundant red to orange berries as pictured there. So that will definitely catch your eye this fall and even into winter to help you identify it. This is how this plant mostly spreads. Those berries are consumed by wildlife, and then you can imagine they go off and deposit what's left from eating that berry is the seed on the inside. They do have arching branches, and the bark can be gray to tan. The twigs are hollow. So if you were to snap off one of those little twigs, you will find that it's hollow all through the middle. This is what the bark looks like as it gets much older. So the examples of it may be looking like a tree. This is what the bark looks like. And I will say that depending on where it's growing, the bark can look a darker color. It can be a bright blonde color. So it does vary depending on where it's at. But this is what they look like as they age. Okay. So that is Eurasian bush honeysuckle. Most of you are probably pretty familiar with this shrub. It is, for the most part, the green shrub that you see leafing out the earliest in the spring and then hanging on to those leaves way late into the year. Next up is multiflora rose. Rosa multiflora. It was introduced from Asia for wildlife habitat, fence rows, and also ornamental rootstock. It is multi-stemmed and very thorny. If you've ever walked into a multiflora rose shrub, you'll never forget it. Leaves are alternate and compound with 7 to 9 leaflets. So that's what the thorns look like. They curve downwards and they actually grab into you if you were to walk into one. They have feathery stipules at the base of the leaf stalk. You can see that in the image there. Small white to pink flowers. And then the rose hips are in clusters following those flowers. It will form very dense thickets, which crowds out all native plants. It will basically be bare ground underneath those shrubs. There's a picture of the flowers for you. Followed by the rose hips. You can see even the rose hips look kind of feathery or hairy. And here's an enlarged image of the leaves for you so you can see what to look for. We do have native roses, so I would recommend that you look at the leaves before you start to manage this species. Our native roses do not have that feathery stipule at the base of that leaf. And it is very obvious from the time that they really start to push leaves out that you can see that difference. Okay, that's multiflora rose. Another one that we are pretty familiar with in Indiana is autumn olive. This one was introduced from China and Japan in 1830. It is different from bush honeysuckle because it has that alternate leaf arrangement. Its growth habit is very similar, but look for that alternate leaf arrangement. And also the lower surface of the leaf is very silver colored. You'll often see it, if the wind's blowing just right, you'll see those leaves shining. The surface of the red fruit that you see there is covered with little silver bumps. And what you might be seeing now are these flowers, kind of a pale yellow, sometimes white, tubular shaped flower. And this is what the backside of those leaves look like. Bright silver. So this plant, just like bush honeysuckle, decreases forest diversity. It spreads densely, and so nothing will grow underneath it. And it also will alter that nitrogen cycle in the soil. Oftentimes, I'll hear this plant called Russian olive. Russian olive is actually a tree. Autumn olive is a shrub. Although autumn olive can get tall and resemble a tree, it is not Russian olive. They're two separate plants. Okay, privet. So this one was introduced as an ornamental from China in the mid 1800s. It has the opposite arrangement on the leaves. They're simple and they're also elliptic with smooth edges. There is a native species that can sometimes be confused with privet called black haw. Black haw is different because it has a toothed edge on that leaf. It looks very similar to invasive privets. So be careful when you're controlling this one. Make sure that you're IDing it correctly before you get rid of it. Black haw is a great plant to have. There are multiple species of privet. You can see there Amur, blunt-leaved, Chinese privet, common privet. The fruit is poisonous to humans and animals. Even some cases of livestock dying from eating privet hedges, even as large as cattle being affected. The leaves contain a chemical that inhibits that digestion for herbivores. And it does form dense thickets, which outcompetes everything for resources. The picture is of privet in early spring when it's really just starting to leaf out. You can see the branching structure of that plant. These are the berries, the fruit that is very poisonous. You might be seeing the flowers this time of year. Again, kind of a tubular shaped flower. And this is what it looks like if you stand back and look at that shrub. Very densely covered in leaves, lots of small leaves all around it. But it will form a very dense thicket if you let it get out of control. Some of us might have it in a hedgerow. When those fruits are eaten, they are spreading into our native woodlands. And so if you have this invasive shrub on your property, now is a good time to get rid of it. Okay, moving on. Japanese barberry. I really hope that none of you have this in your woodlands. It is an awful plant to deal with. This one was again introduced as an ornamental shrub in the 1800s from Japan. You can see in the picture what it has the potential to do to a woodland area. All of the red in that image is Japanese barberry. So it forms that large thicket. It invades forests and savannas. It is also an alternate host for rust disease on wheat crops and has been correlated to Lyme disease. Because of that dense thicket, it supports an increase of the black-legged tick and also the white-footed mouse. And so you have an increase of ticks, and then you have mice going through there, and then potentially those ticks can survive more through the winter. And so moving on to its next host could be to humans, and you have an increase in Lyme disease. It creates a warm, humid microclimate. So as in the picture, that is a dense climate and nice and warm and cozy for those ticks to survive through the wintertime. This is what cultivars of this plant look like. There are many, too many to list. So there are golden colors, light green, dark purple, light purple, red. They are all invasive. You can see when it's green and in the woods, it's spread. This is what the berries look like after the leaves have fallen off. So those berries will hang on through the wintertime and are spread by wildlife. Just for reference, the black-legged or deer tick, that's what it looks like up close. So you'll see an increase in population in that tick in particular. This is what Japanese barberry looks like when it has berries on it. Wanted to show you a large image. You can see the thorns there. That's particularly why it's hard to control, because it is covered in those really sharp little barbs. No fun to control manually. I wanted to show you what it looks like in Vigo County in my woods. So there is actually a lot of Japanese barberry spreading in my woodlands, and I foliar sprayed some of them. All of the yellow is Japanese barberry after it's been foliar sprayed. There's quite a bit of it there. This is just a zoomed in image for you so you can see what it looks like. There is also multiflora rose mixed in there. So two very thorny invasive shrubs. Okay, winged burning bush. Or dwarf burning bush. That's another cultivar, dwarf burning bush. Introduced from Northeast Asia in the 1860s. Usually you see it in these hedgerows, as in the picture. The leaves are simple, toothed, and opposite. It does have a very corky tissue along the stems, and that bright red foliage is what most of us has purchased these plants for, to have that bright red foliage in our landscape. It does form dense shrubby infestations and alters all the forest community. It is adaptable to a wide range of conditions for growing, but does not favor wet areas, although it will spread in a wet area. So I have found it in creek bottoms before. Those images are what you might be seeing now in your woods. The top one is it in green leaves, and that is a spread burning bush. That's one that I found in the middle of a state park. And then at the bottom there, you can see what we are most familiar with, that red foliage. But you can see the bark of that plant is winged. This is what you're going to see if it takes over a woodland. So there should be native plants there, but we have an invasive shrub that has consumed that woodland area. This is why it's bad. Aesthetically, it might be pretty, but there should be native plants there. So if you were to look at the calendar of control, you can see that you can control these shrubs with the same mechanisms. So manually, or also mechanically, you can hand pull them right now. That's what I'm doing, is spending some time pulling them. Or you can also dig them out if they're small and manageable in that way. This time of year, if the soil's just right and nice and moist, they come out of the ground pretty easily if they're small. So that's what I'm spending most of my time doing, is pulling them out. Once you pull them out, you don't want to just lay them back on the ground. Many of you know that if you were to do that, it'll just grow right back into the soil. So there's a couple options. You can kind of beat the soil off of those roots and then hang it up on a tree, or maybe drape it over a log that's nearby, but just keep those roots from hitting the ground. You can also, if you're in a residential area, you can cut them up, cut up the shrub, and then bag it or put it in maybe your city brush pickup or cleanup. If you're out in a rural area, you can also burn them. So bring them to your burn pile and burn them. Another option this time of year is to be brush cutting, chainsawing, or bush hogging, and just getting them under control mechanically with a mower, knocking them down. You will likely need to return with a chemical control if you do that, because the shrub will just come right back. And so it would be a multi-step process of controlling it that way. With chemical, you can use a basal bark treatment. I will explain what that is later. A cut surface treatment, June to March. So we are not in the month of June, so you want to hold off. Right now, those shrubs will actually push that herbicide out. If you put it on the cut that you have just made, it'll push that herbicide out. So wait until a little bit later. And then, of course, you can do foliar spray with a glyphosate or a triclopyr for those smaller plants, or on those resprouts that maybe if you're cutting this time of year, you can come back and foliar spray on those resprouts. Okay. So in detail a little bit more, basal bark treatment is handy when you're dealing with a lot of invasive shrubs like autumn olive. If you have a dense stand of autumn olive and you can get around them, because you have to basal bark all the way around that shrub, you want to be able to navigate that entire shrub. So ideally, you want to do that on your feet and not crawling on your belly. So that's one way you could do it. Cut surface treatment is my preferred method on the large shrubs, especially like bush honeysuckle and autumn olive and burning bush. I like to cut that plant and then paint on an herbicide. You want to immediately paint on that herbicide. Don't cut it and then come back the next day. That plant will have sealed over and it will not take up that herbicide. And then foliar spray is another option. You saw in that picture, that's what I did on the barberry. That's because getting to the base of that shrub can be quite difficult with all those little barbs, as well as with multiflora rose with all of its thorns. So foliar spray can be an option that you utilize. And of course, there's always heavy machinery options. If you were able to use that, you could go through with a forestry mower, brush cutter, and cut all them down and then return with a foliar spray. Okay, so that's some detail. When in doubt, reach out to your regional specialist. We will help you out. Let's cover some trees. What are some invasive trees? Thought I'd just get this one out of the way. You might be familiar with calorie pear. This one's native to China and Vietnam, introduced for hybridization, then landscaping. Leaves are alternate, simple, toothed, and many of us know now that they have very weak wood and branching structure. As they get older, especially, you might have one that has fallen in recent storms in Indiana. They tend to get too heavy in their canopy and they just split right open. So they're a bit of a safety hazard. They do have that early white flower, as you can see in the picture. Most of us in the state, the tree is done flowering at this time. But we just saw that white wave across our state. So there's white flowers, and then they become those brownish fruits that the birds, especially European starlings, another non-native, tend to really love. So they will eat those fruits and then spread them. They form dense thickets, which excludes other tree establishment. So in Indiana, that's a really bad thing. We thrive on our woodlands. So having this weak wood tree taking over our woodlands is definitely not a good thing. It does spread very rapidly. Where you see it now, you often see more than just one, especially in disturbed areas, tends to take over old fields quite easily. It's been here since 1908. It was originally introduced into Maryland. That is an image of the typical calorie pear once it gets big, kind of a lollipop or popsicle shape. Those are what the leaves look like, and then you can see the fruit in that image as well. There are too many cultivars of this tree to list. So all those ornamental pear trees are invasive unless they're producing a pear that you can eat, which is definitely not what you see in that picture. They're an invasive species. So we don't want to have those calorie pears taking over our state. This is the flower that you likely saw just a few weeks ago. And this is the bark of a mature calorie pear. Okay. Let's cover Norway maple. This one was introduced as an ornamental from Europe. Leaves have 5 to 7 lobes with sharp point. The lower surface of the leaves are paler and smooth, except for stiff hairs on the vein axils. Buds are way more rounded than the sugar maple. You can see the picture there of the bud in the upper right corner. The leaf petioles contain a milky sap. And then my favorite way to tell this apart from our native maples are the seeds. They have very wide angle wing seeds that are mature in September and October. And just like our native maples, they're wind dispersed. Unfortunately, this non-native tree is invading forests and forest edges. Even a dense canopy, it'll reduce that forest diversity. And so we definitely don't want this tree. Wanted to show you the seeds. So if you're maybe out and about and you're trying to figure out, is this a native or an invasive, you can of course look at those leaves, but the seeds are a really good way to tell if you're looking at the native versus the invasive. So you can see on the left is our native sugar maple. See how they hang downwards? On the right is that Norway maple. They really split out towards the edges. And if you have a sense of humor, the native maple seeds look a lot like Hulk Hogan's mustache. The invasive Norway maple seeds look a lot like Captain Hook's mustache. I hope you're giggling right now. That's a really good way to remember it too. If you can remember, Hulk Hogan is good, Captain Hook is obviously bad. Okay, another one you're probably not familiar with that we're really starting to see spread is Amur cork tree. It will grow quite tall, up to 60 feet tall. You can see the leaves pictured there. They're pinnately compound with 5 to 13 leaflets. So each one of those is a leaf, and then you count the leaflets. The leaves smell like turpentine when they're crushed. The fruits are small drupes or fleshy fruits with a thin skin. You can see in the picture there, those are the fruits. And then it has a very corky bark, as in the picture. So this is one that we are starting to see. And so if you can document this tree for us, I'll tell you how. That would be great, so we have an idea of just how invasive this tree is and where it's really spreading. Be careful, those leaves can look a lot like some of our native trees. When in doubt, take pictures, report it, and we will let you know if that's what it is. So how do you control those species mentioned? Of course, you can pull the smaller ones, or you can dig them out. Sometimes that works if they're really small. You can brush cut or chainsaw them down, but again, you will have to return with a chemical control if you do that. It will come right back. So if you're doing a chemical control, you can cut surface treat with a glyphosate or a triclopyr, similar to what you did with those shrubs. Foliar treatment of large infestations, you want to do that when they're under waist height. You obviously don't want to be spraying over your head. And then basal bark treatment can work really well if you're not in an area that's frequented or near structures, like in an urban setting. You don't want those trees just randomly falling, maybe harming either someone or structures. So those are some options for controlling those invasive trees. Tree of Heaven has its own control. It's different than those other trees that were mentioned. So we'll cover it in a different section here. So this is a medium-sized tree with alternate compound leaves. Has glandular teeth at the base of each leaflet. And thin bark is gray and also shallowly fissured. They are dioecious, which means they have separate male and female plants. That wind dispersed seed of 300,000 per tree is how this tree is spreading. The foliage is very odorous and has been likened to smelling like rancid peanut butter. It does form dense colonies and invades forest edges easily, and also will go into the interior, especially if there's a disturbance like a tree falls, or if you do any timber stand improvement, you might have Tree of Heaven creep in. Has a very aggressive root system and will resprout if you cut it. It does have high pollen, so it can cause allergies. And then there's quasinoids in the sap that can be of a health risk. This is what the bark looks like. Although I have measured a tree that was 160 inches around, a Tree of Heaven, and the bark looks nothing like that. It is the largest I've ever seen, but the bark doesn't look anything like that as it gets really big. The seeds don't change, however, so you will see these papery thin seeds, and they're in these great big clusters, and they do turn kind of a pink color. This is what the leaves look like. So you'll look at that complete leaf, and then you'll look at these little leaflets, and they have these little notches on them. So look for that to compare it to our natives, like maybe black walnut or our native sumacs that resemble this tree. Control on this one is different than the others. Hand pulling or digging can be a way of controlling it. You can cut and treat the stump with a 2,4-D Tordon. You can hack and squirt. I'll show you what that is. But do not girdle that trunk, because if you cut into it too much, it'll send up an army of little tree of heavens. Basil bark treatment with triclopyr ester with basil oil, not an aquatic area, will work as well. This tree and its control is on our calendar for you. There are, unfortunately, more trees to watch out for, so I have listed some of them here. Princess tree or Paulownia tomentosa, mimosa tree, sawtooth oak, caper mulberry, white mulberry, glossy buckthorn, and then the Chinese parasol tree. I will put more information about all of these species in the box folder that will be available to you at the end of our series. Let's cover some methods of control since we've mentioned different methods of getting rid of these invasives. What do I mean? So cut surface or cut stump treatment. This picture there, it's basically where you cut the base of that plant and then apply the herbicide. Remember, directly to that cut as you're there. Don't go off and then come back to it. Do not use this method if there's heavy sap flow. Like I said, right now, it'll actually push that herbicide out. This is what you can do on some of the large trees and large shrubs. You can just paint that herbicide on the outer layer, as shown in the picture. On shrubs, you can see in that lower left picture, I basically do that on all shrubs. I cover the entire cut. That blue color is just a dye. So I use dye in my herbicide so I know where the herbicide has been applied. I highly recommend you do that as well. So your method is really your preference. Always use proper PPE. So read that label, it'll tell you what to do. You can use daubers as pictured on the left. Those are actually my preferred method. If I'm doing cut surface treatment, I use these little daubers. And I can share where I purchased those from. You can also use spray bottles, paint brushes, basically any way that you can get that herbicide on that cut. Foliar application is pretty self-explanatory. You're going to spray those leaves or spray the foliage. You do want to make sure that there's minimal wind, no precipitation forecasted, and that really depends on the herbicide you're using. So you want to read that herbicide and see when it's rain fast or ready. If it were to rain within so many hours, you want to make sure that the herbicide is going to be effective. You have to hit all of the leaves. You don't want to spray it until it's dripping off the leaves, but you have to hit every single leaf. That's why the dye is very helpful, because you can actually see where you've been. On foliar spray, you want to limit that off-target damage, especially if you're in an area where there's a lot of rare native plants. You want to be very cautious and cover those. Or if you're spraying in your landscaping and you've got a bunch of plants that you really want to keep, try to limit the off-target damage best as possible. You can cover those plants that you want to keep and then spray the one you don't. Pulling or weed wrenching is another way. This time of year, if you have one of these tools, you can use these. It's a lever action, so you use your own strength with the help of the lever, and you just pop them right out of the ground. Remember, don't lay them right back on the ground though. Hang them up to dry and or burn them or bag them. Hack and squirt, this is what you can do on that tree of heaven. So you want to use a hatchet and spray bottle. You can see there in the picture. You hack into the tree and then spray right into that cut. There are some nuances, so you don't want to cut too deep. If you cut in a way that the herbicide just spills right out, clearly you're going to target some other species around the base of that tree. So you want to be very cautious of that. And then always read the labels of your herbicide for application rate. So that's hack and squirt. Here's an image of basil bark treatment. See how you have to get around the bark of all of those, all of the trunk, all of the stems, you need to get all the way around them. So being able to access all of that is key for this to work. So you want to make an entire band around it. Application should be made from the base of the woody stem to the height of around 12 to 15 inches above the ground line. Again, don't use this method if it's in heavy sap flow or if there's actually snow or vegetation blocking that area where you're trying to target. Basil bark uses ester-based triclopyr herbicide, such as, for example, Garland 4 Remedy Ultra. And then you'll need an oil carrier to actually penetrate through. Okay. Another option is prescribed fire. How you get started on that, I would highly recommend getting in touch with the Indiana Prescribed Fire Council. Their website is listed there, and this image was taken from their website. They are a great resource. They have trainings. They have a list of contractors on that website. So I would start there. And prescribed fire can be really good for your woodland. Then there's goats and sheep. You can employ them as a prescribed grazing way of treatment. That's actually my little lamb named Ethel. But it's not exactly just putting up a fence and releasing the grazers. There's a bit of a science to it. And so you can read through that. I've also put in this really great document from Fish and Wildlife Service. You can look at the stages and the animals that will eat the plants that you're trying to target. It's a really great document there with lots of really good information. It's a little bit more complicated than just putting animals on your woodlands, trying to control these invasive shrubs and trees. So that was all the ways that you can manage these invasive shrubs and trees. Again, you don't have to take notes on all of this. Right now, I will make this PowerPoint available because I know it's a lot of information. But how can you make a difference? Some of the other ways that you can make a difference and get involved. I mentioned reporting. This is a great way to learn some of these invasives if you download the app onto either your smartphone or your smart device, or if you go online onto edmaps.org/Indiana, you can look at the invasive species that we have documented, and also you can document ones that you're not sure of. But this is a nice way to get started, to start really looking through those invasive species. There is a new app for Android. This just came out. So EdMaps 1.0.1 or EdMaps 1 is for Android. For all you iPhone users, still stay with that Great Lakes Early Detection Network. Soon, EdMaps 1 will be on iPhone, but it is not currently. Okay, I know that's slightly confusing, but stick with what you have on your iPhone, and all you Android users update. Also, of course, learn native plants. These are some great resources for you. Figure out what plants you want to keep or what plants you want to put in after you remove those invasives. A lot of great resources on the Indiana Native Plant Society, and there's some books there pictured. We do have a Facebook group if you want to join that at the Indiana Native Plant Society. There's a wealth of information on there. And then lastly, participate in local events. I've just put a few in here for you in my region, but there's way more than this across the state. So Owen County, there's your landowner meetings every third Wednesday. So right now, reach out to them via email or phone to see what's happening with their meetings currently. I would recommend that with all of these groups. Here's Vigo County, every second Thursday. They have a Facebook page. So does Owen County. Sweet Owen Woodlands Network has a Facebook page. So does Putnam County Remove Invasive Plants. They have a great Facebook page too. And they meet the first Monday. I do, and so do the other regional specialists. We all do these invasive species landowner surveys and management plans. So we can do that for you. Come on site, tell you what you have and how to manage it. That is at no cost. So reach out to your regional specialist. Want to recognize all the image credits throughout my presentation for the entire series. With that, I'll take some questions, and that is my contact information if there's any follow-up you would like to do. We do have Facebook and we have Instagram, so check us out on there if you're on social media.